Today, I want to show you a tool that lets you create custom smooth animations right from the edit page without using any keyframes, and that lets you add in motion blur that doesn't slow down your render. This is my WippAnimate tool from the editor collection. I want to show you what it can do, why you should get it, and walk you through how to use it. In DaVinci Resolve, WippAnimate is an effect, so it's under Effects Library, under Effect, and that means that we can put it on any photo, any video, any title, anything that lets an effect go on it, we can use WippAnimate to animate it. I can simply drag it down and drop it on this clip, or I can select the clip and then use that Shift Space tool to type in WippAnimate, and I can add it in that way, whichever you prefer. When we add that in, you can see it adds in a ton of controls in the inspector, and that's the beauty of this tool, just the sheer amount of stuff that it lets you do. And with a lot of controls can come a lot of confusion, but this tool is set up to be really easy. There's a lot of similarities between each one of them, so if you know how to use the size animation, you know how to use the opacity animation. We're going to ignore all of the fancy stuff to start and talk about these four controls right here at the top. These are the main resting position controls. So that means I can move the center and move the image, I can change the size, I can change the angle, and I also have a pivot point. Now, you'll want to go down to the bottom left of the viewer and turn on the Fusion overlay, so that way you have all of these on-screen controls. So instead of having to, manually come up here and move the center X and Y, I can just grab this point, move this around, and that way it updates its position. Now I did say that these are the resting controls. That pretty much just means the default controls when it's not animating. We'll have some start controls, we'll have end controls, and the resting controls are what's in the middle, the final spot that it's going to go to. So a lot of times when I'm animating, I like to set up the resting position right away. So maybe I'll change the size. Let's say we want to have the logo pop up in the bottom corner. In that case, I'll bring the size down, we'll grab the point, move it over here, and this will be the final resting size. And next up, we have the global anim engine. The anim engine is my system that handles all the animations for you. You can see right here, we can choose if it animates out, animates in. If we want, we can not mirror the animations, so that way I could have the first animation take 1 second, and then the second animation take 2 seconds. And then we also have some buttons to make programming that a lot easier. We'll talk about that in just a second. For now, I'm going to turn mirror back on, and now we actually get to look at the different animation controls, because right now, if I move back and forth, you can see it's not animating at all. It's just in that position that we set. So starting off with the size, if I press the drop down, we can enable the size animation, and now we have a few more controls. All right, and let's take a look at what this did. If I go to the beginning, you can see it's going to zoom in from 0, and then at the very end, it's going to animate out. If I were to come back up to this global anim engine and turn off the animate out, that means it's still going to animate in, but it's not going to animate out at the end. Let's turn that back on and talk about this mirror out down in the size, because it seems like that might be the same thing as the mirror up in the anim engine, but it's not. And what it basically does is gives us another size control. So if I turn this off, we have a start size, a resting size, and an end size. So since these are all set to different values at the beginning, it's going to go from 0, and then it's going to go to 0.441. And then at the very end, it's going to go from the resting size and it's going to go up to the end size. So if you want a different animation at the end compared to the beginning, you can use this mirror out to customize that. And then again, going back up to the anim engine, if you wanted the out animation to take a little bit longer, you could turn off the mirror animation and set that length to be 2. Hopefully you can see how this works and just how customizable and how powerful this is. And again, if you just want to keep this really simple, which I do most of the time, I just keep mirror out on, I leave the anim engine settings as is, and then that way I just have really nice smooth animations right away. Okay, but we can animate other controls as well. We're not limited to just one animation on this tool. So if I come down to position and enable this, what this will do is again, keep it right at the resting value that was set up here at the top. We also have that same control right down here just so it's easy to find. But this has two different modes that we can use. We have the point offset and we have the distance offset. I really like using the distance offset because it moves based on the resting point. Now, in order to see what this is doing, I'm actually going to turn off the size animation and then we're going to go all the way to the beginning. Now, if I move the start offset, you can see this is choosing how far away it is from that resting point, the red dot on the screen. Depending on how far I set it, I can also change the direction to change where it actually goes. So 0 is going to be the right side of the screen, and then you can use -90, that'll go to the bottom. You could do a -180 or even just doing 180, and that'll put it to the left, so that way it moves to the left. So just going in 90-degree increments will move it in any direction of the screen. In addition to that, if I bring up the start offset and press play, you can see it smoothly slides up. We have a start arc, and if I drag this off to the side, set it to something like -45, you can see it's going to have like a little bit of a loop in the animation instead of just going straight. So it's a cool way to just add a little bit to your animations. So that's what the distance does, and I can also uncheck mirror out so I have the same thing at the end. But what the point control does is it uses these other controls right here on the screen. So instead of the beginning animation being relative to where the resting center is, you know, if I go over here and move the resting point up, eventually we'll see the logo because it's offsetting the center position or the start position as well. Under the point mode, the start center is completely on its own. If I move the resting center, it's not going to move the logo at all. And I have the start center and I can move this around anywhere that I'd like. So if you always want it going from one spot to another, I would use the point control. But if you're just trying to get quick, really nice animations, just use the distance control. So what I want to do for this animation, I'm going to disable the position and re-enable the size. I want to have this zoom up, and then in the middle of the clip, I want this to slide all the way off to the left side of the screen. And we can do this all inside of one clip. So if I enable the position animation, what we're going to do is unlink the animation. And what this does is adds in a second anim engine just for the position controls. And right now these anim engines have the same settings. So you can see it's going to scale from the left side because that's where the start size is, or the start center is, and then it's going to move over to the right size. But what I could do is offset the animation. So if I just drag this up, it's going to add in a 0.8 second offset. So that way it zooms up and then it slides off to the side. And that's where these buttons right down here come from. If I decide that right here is where I want it to start that animation, or maybe I go a little bit quicker, I can just press the start here button and it's going to figure out what the offset needs to be, so that way it starts at this point. And if I want it to be to the right side right here, I can just press end here. And again, it's going to figure out what that value needs to be, so that way the animation takes place in that amount of time. Now in this case, I did say I want it to show up in the bottom right first and then move to the bottom left. So what I can do is just press the swap button, and that's going to switch the resting center with the start center. So when I do that and press play, it's going to zoom in the bottom right, and then it's going to move over to the bottom left. Really, really easy. And then if we play this, it's going to do the exact same animation at the end, just reverse. So it's going to move back over to the right, and then it's going to zoom down. And honestly, what I would do here is turn off the animate out under the position, so that way only the size animates out at the end, and it's just a bit more smooth. So you can see it's really easy to make these animations, and all of these have motion blur by default. If you want to customize this, I'm just going to collapse the position and size. All the way down at the bottom, we have the motion blur box, and we can change the intensity of it just by dragging this right here. So all the way up, the value of 1 is going to have a lot of motion blur. Setting this to be a value of 0 is not going to be any motion blur. And then we have a bunch of other animations here. So we have the angle. This will let us just choose the Z rotation. And then we have an aspect, so we can change the width and the height. We have blur, so that way we can have it blur on and off, like do a come into focus effect. We have glow, opacity, as well as a shake animation. Now, we're not limited to these animations. These are all of these the standard animations that take place at the beginning and end, or in the middle if we use the offset enough. But all the way up at the top, we have a middle tab. And if I press this enable button, we have pretty much all of these same controls that we can animate throughout the entirety of the clip. So to really show this off, what I'm going to do is reset this entire control, so that way the logo's back at the beginning. It's not animated at all. And under the middle tab, let's take a look at all these. So the first one is the shake. This one is going to be on even if the middle animations are not enabled. And that's because it doesn't really fit into the middle category. It's just kind of there in the middle, but we can't customize all the other stuff that we would with the other animations. We'll talk about that in a second. But the shake animation is really cool because I can enable this, and that just gives it some nice movement throughout the entire clip. And we have a ton of settings down here to customize that. If you want to change the X and Y strength, the zoom, the rotation, you can even turn those off. And then we have the speed and wobble to change how fast and chaotic it is. And the cool thing, if I crank this up, you can see that this is also affected by that motion blur. So that way, everything from the standard animations to the middle animations is just going to look nice and smooth. All right, but let's turn off the shake just so we can see what the other animations are doing a bit easier. And when I enable this, we have a few controls right up here at the top. And this is the middle anim engine. It doesn't have all the same controls. Basically what it does is lets you offset when it starts, offset when it ends, and we have some buttons to make that easy. And then we also have the easing curves. Under the size, if I enable this, what it has is a start offset and an end offset. So these aren't going to set a exact precise size. What it's going to do is reference the resting size that we have right up here, and then it's going to add or subtract from that. So in this case, it's going to do -0.1 at the beginning, and then it's going to scale up to be 0.1. Now, depending on what you're doing, you might not want any easing on these. So what you could do is set the curve type to be linear. So that way it's just a constant. It's always going to be moving at the same size. And I could come down, maybe enable this for the rotation as well. So that way it zooms and rotates throughout the entirety of the clip. If I wanted, I could say wait until right here to start. So I just press the start here. It does the offset. And then I could have it end right here. And when I press set end, now when I press play, it's just going to rest there. And then it's going to rotate. And then it's going to stop in the middle of the clip. In this case, you would want to have easing, so turn on the easing like that. Sign works really good for middle animations because you don't want the easing to be too intense and too noticeable, and that looks awesome. If I reset the offset start and offset end, we also have this enable loops button. When I enable this, what this does is sets a ping pong loop, and we can choose how many times it actually loops. So when I press play, you can see it's just going to rotate back and forth between those values, the amount of times that we program right here. If I want, I could do a standard loop as well, so that means that it's going to go to one, and it's going to reset and go back to the other. This one doesn't look as good, but there's a few cases where you might want to use it, so I added it. But most of the time, just leave this set to be ping pong. Now, I do want to touch on the easing just a little bit more. I'm going to disable the middle, come back to the size, and just enable this so we can play around with it. So on all of the anim engines, we have our easing curves, so we can set this to be linear, easing, or custom. Easing is going to have these drop downs with all of these different like custom controls that we can do. A lot of times I like to set the first one to be none and the second one to be expo, so that way there's no easing at the beginning, and so it's a really fast animation and then slowly comes to a rest at the end. But if you have the beginning set to be none, you could do something like elastic. If it's not set to none at the beginning, the elastic one is not going to look right. But this way it has some, like a little bit of a elastic, more live animation. Looks pretty cool. But if you really want to customize this, you can set this to be a custom animation or a custom curve. So I can come in here, I can select these and move them around and make my own curve. And that way when I play it, it's exactly what I want. I can dial that in, get it looking really nice. All right, but we're still going. There's a lot of stuff inside of this tool. So coming all the way back up to the top, we have the mask section. When I enable this, it does as you'd expect, it adds a mask to our image. And to show off masks, I'm gonna use this other image just so it's a bit easier to see what's going on. So let's grab WippAnimate, drop this down, come to the mask tab, and then enable this. So the first thing we have is the mode. So we can apply this pre-animate or post-animate. So pre-animate means that when we move our original image, the mask is gonna go with that. If we animate the image, the mask is also going to be animated. If I set this to be post-animate, now the image is going to move separate from the mask. All of the animations are not going to apply to the mask. I'm going to leave this on pre-animate right now. And if we set the width and height of this mask to be 1, this is a great way to just add in some corner radius. I do this all the time for different screenshots. I fit the mask around it, add in a little bit of corner radius, and it just looks really nice. But we could also set the mask shape to be a circle. We could use custom, which means on the Fusion page, I can plug in like a polygon into it. And you can access the Fusion page right here, so you can make a custom mask. And then with both of these, you can just change the size as well as its position and move that around. The cool thing about the masks is you can actually animate these separate from everything else. So maybe I want to have this crop into just the Whip Templates logo, so I'll bring this down, and then we'll just add in some corner radius like that. Under the animation tab, if I enable this, we have all of the same controls right here, but it is the start controls. So if I go back to the beginning, you can see it's going to animate the mask down so it's only around the logo. And this links back to the global anim engine. If you'd like, you can unlink that so you can control it separately. And then back on the controls tab, we could come to the position and go ahead and enable this. And then let's set this to be point. And then we'll move this down to the bottom corner and set the start center to be 0.5, 0.5, so it's the middle of the screen. So now when I play this, you can see it animates down. We can create a corner camera effect like this. I wouldn't do it that way. I have the whip cam effect that does a way better job, so use that. But this is just an example of what you can create using those masks. Back under the mask tab, we also have an outline. So if I just check this box, it'll add in this case, it's a white outline. So let's maybe make that a red. And then we have the outline mode between box and circle. If you don't have any corner radius on the mask, leave this on box. But if you do have corner radius, set this to be circle, so that way the outline is consistent around the entire image. Then we can change the thickness right here. All right, deleting this, let's go back to our main logo, and then I'm just gonna reset this so it's back to the default. Under the utility tab, we have some cool stuff like adding in a drop shadow, and I can change the color so you can see what that is. We can also do a PNG outline, so this won't work on like a full screen image like the one that I was just using, but if you have like a logo, you can enable this, set the color, set the thickness. We have that same box and circle control to change what the outline is actually looking like. And then we also have this measure tab, and this stuff is really cool and just a nice thing to help you out with tough images and tough logos. Say that you had a logo that was like off center or something like this. I'm gonna make this into a compound clip so that way, it's just its own, all these controls have been reset. If you have that, it works, you can still animate it, but if I do something like the size, it's gonna be animating from the center of the image rather than the center of the logo. So if I come over to the utility tab, come down to measure, what I could do is center the pivot, so that way it puts the pivot control inside of the middle of the logo, and that way the animation now comes from the center of the logo. Now if I wanted, I could just center the image itself, So it moves the image over, and we would want to reset the pivot. And then that way you don't have to change the pivot in here, and it just works. So it's a good way to center an image and a good way to center the pivot on the center of an image. All right, but grabbing the original logo one more time, I want to talk about how to do multi-point animations with this tool. So if I grab WippAnimate, throw this down, again, what we're going to do is set the resting points. Let's bring this down, set this down in the bottom corner, and then let's just have the size animate on and keep this really, really simple. To make multi-point animations where we have this entire thing move over to a different corner, maybe change its size again, whatever that might be, what we want to do is click on this clip, press the copy current up at the top. So it's going to copy all of these settings. It's also going to turn off the animate out for all of the animations that are currently enabled. And then we want to split the clip. So the important thing about turning off the animate out is now this clip's not going to animate out at all, and the next clip is going to handle rest of the animations. So now that we've done that, before we press the paste button, what we want to do is move this anywhere else on the screen. And the reason that we want to move this first is because the paste button, when we do that, is it's going to go through and enable all of the animations that we need and not enable the ones that we don't need. So if I just move the position and then don't move the size, it wouldn't need to turn the size on. If I don't change the angle, it wouldn't need to turn the angle on. But if I do change the center and the size and put this down in this corner, when I press paste previous, what it's going to do is turn on the different animations. You can see it turned on the position animation. So that way it's going to zoom up. Once it reaches the end of this clip, it's then going to animate to the next spot. And the really nice thing about this is I can just keep doing this as many times as I'd like. So I'm going to press the copy button. I'm going to split the clip. And then let's say on this one, we move it all the way over here. We zoom it down, we change the angle, spin it, do something like that, and then do paste previous once again. And again, it's just gonna do a perfectly smooth animation. It's really fun to make these. And then at the end, when I eventually want it to animate out, what I'd be able to do is just split the clip one more time. I'll do a copy current, and then over here, what we could do is just maybe bring the size down, set the angle back to 0, and then do paste previous. And again, what it's going to do is just animate off just like so. So that's the WippAnimate tool. As you can see, there's a lot of settings, a lot of customization, and a lot of potential that you have with this tool. If you don't already have it, it's part of the Editor Collection Pack, which is my set of time-saving edit page tools that I've put together. Stuff like zooms, corner camera effects, 3D camera effects, a ton of awesome stuff that you can find out more in the link down below. This tool will save you so much time that it'll easily pay for itself. And if you guys have any questions about this, just let me know.